Good morning. My name is Ethan. I am an educator for the Artesian Alliance, which is the Cheehaw Park and Zoo, the Thronatiska Heritage Center, and the Flint River Aquarium here in Albany, Georgia. And I'm actually at the Flint River Aquarium right now. And today I want to talk to you about a broad group of organisms known as detritivores. So the name might sound similar to some things you might have heard of before, like carnivore or herbivore or omnivore. That's because it relates to the same thing. We're looking at animals that eat specific things. So a carnivore eats meat. Some examples of carnivores are things like big cats um, and eagles and hawks and falcons. All of those guys are carnivores. They eat meat exclusively. Some examples of herbivores, which are plant eaters, are things like rabbits and deer and horses. All of these guys eat grass and plants and fruits and anything that is a plant material, either in its entirety or pretty much in its entirety. That's what an herbivore is. They are a plant eater. And omnivores, which is usually the third one that we talk about, they eat both. So they're capable of eating plants or animals. Some examples of omnivores are things like mice and humans and bears, and even dogs are omnivores, though they mostly eat meat. And pigs. So there's a lot of these guys. They eat meat, they eat plants, and they eat both. But there's other things that you can eat too, that aren't necessarily plants or animals, or living plants and animals. Whenever we talk about carnivores and herbivores and omnivores, we're talking about eating living things, right? So the herbivores eat plants that are alive or very recently died. The carnivores eat animals that were just alive and very recently died. They usually kill their prey before they eat them. Some don't, but most do. And omnivores obviously do either or. But what about creatures that eat dead stuff? Because that's what a detritivore is. A detritivore eats dead material. It can be dead plant material. It can be dead animal material. It just depends on the creature. So it's a very broad group, and it actually isn't even just animals. Other things can be detritivores too. A lot of fungus are detritivores. Even some plants are detritivores. So we're going to look at a bunch of different kinds of detritivores today and what they do and how they do it, and exactly why it is they are so important, because I would argue that detritivores are the most important kind of eater in the entire animal kingdom and beyond. So to start, I've mentioned that detritivores eat decomposing things. They actually are the things that do the decomposing usually. So a lot of detritivores are tiny little bacteria that eat away at plants and animals once they've died. Other things that do that are things like fungus and bugs and all kinds of other stuff like that. So instead of hunting down food, instead of grazing for food, what they'll do is they will live usually on the ground, and they will eat away at whatever lands on the ground. So crumbs, plants, so like leaves, if they fall onto the ground, they'll eat the leaves. If an animal dies, they'll start to eat out the animal. So a great example of a detritivore would be something like an ant. They eat dead plants and animal material. Some animals are detritivores for some of their life, but not others. So a lot of larvae start out as detritivores, but aren't necessarily detritivores whenever they become adults. Some of them turn into carnivores or predators or even prey in their adult form, but they start as just tiny little larvae. And actually, I have an example, if I can get him. I went into my garden this morning and I found me a bunch of detritivores, and there might be a reason for that. Maybe we'll explore why it is gardens seem to have so many. So, if you can get a nice good look at this guy here, I'm holding on to one of his legs. He might try to bite me in a minute, but that's okay. He doesn't have very strong legs. So this guy here is a beetle. The way that I can tell he's a beetle is because he's an insect, so he's got 6 legs. Boy, is he hard to keep up with. He's got 6 legs, and he's got this hard carapace on the outside that makes him kind of difficult to hurt. So he's got what's known as an exoskeleton because he's an insect, and all insects have exoskeletons. So he's kind of hard to hurt here. This guy, I don't know exactly what kind of beetle he is, but a lot of beetles will lay their larvae in the dirt, and their larvae will eat at dead plant material, so like dead leaves and things like that. And the dead plant material will eventually grow, or will feed these worms. They look like worms, like little mealworms, and eventually they will pupate and become these full-sized adult beetles. So these beetles eat dead plants as children, and then as adults they also do the same. A lot of beetles do this. A lot of insects do this. So even things like cicadas live in the ground for most of their lives, and they actually eat the sort of waste that was dropped by trees. And then whenever they become adults, they crawl up the tree, turn into those adult cicadas that we all love that make all that noise in the summer. They mate, and then they lay their eggs, and then they die. So a lot of animals, a lot of insects especially, rely on stuff like detritus, all of this dead plant material, to produce their food. So what they'll do is they will take things like this leaf and they will eat it. As you can see, there's actually a little piece of it that was already eaten out. They will eat these dead leaves and such that fall onto the ground. And as they eat and as they eat and as they eat, they will start to poop, like all animals do. They'll poop, and they'll poop out fresh soil. And this soil is excellent for feeding and for using as plant material. So plants actually rely on these detritivores to make good soil for them. And actually, I want to show you guys something here. We actually can farm detritivores. So if you've ever heard the word compost before, compost is whenever you take bits of scraps of food that were left over and convert them into usable soil so that you can grow plants. Detritivores do that. That's their whole thing. They take old food and eat it and turn it into fresh soil. And actually, I do this at home using red worms. And so I'm going to grab a few red worms here. I actually right next to here I have it looks just like a normal bin, but inside of this bin is a ton of worms. And these worms will eat up things like, say, this old banana or this orange peel that I have. And they will turn it into, and I wish you could smell it because it does genuinely smell delicious, into this soil that I have in my hand right here. And actually, this is a red worm right here, chilling, hanging out. These guys will eat all of that plant material and they will turn it into good, usable dirt. As you can see here, let me lean it down a little bit here. You can see all this dirt. I put a little bit of soil in here, but you can see that he's breaking down things like this is a piece of a potato, and these worms will break down all of this stuff and turn it into good usable soil in a process known as composting. So they decompose all of this soil, or all of these old scraps of veggies and fruit and coffee grounds we throw in there, things like that. And there we go, got it secured. And what it'll do is these worms will poop out the dirt, and through a process, it's kind of an interesting process. Through a process, that dirt will become good soil. So what they need is they need air to be able to breathe, and they actually do what's known as aerobic decomposition. So they need air to constantly be flowing, which is actually why on the bottom I have these big air vents with screen on them, and on the top, on this lid here, you might be able to see it, you might not, but do you see how there's holes in different spots on this lid? I keep a constant, there's just a constant slow flow of air through the thing to keep it dry, not super dry, just slight moisture, and all this stuff just slowly breaks down due to a bunch of bacteria and other things like that inside of it, and then also things like those worms, which will eat it and turn it into soil. Another bug, little creepy crawly that you might find in your garden that does a lot of work is the roly-poly, sometimes also called a pill bug. These little dudes, these little guys, let's see if he'll crawl onto this finger. These little guys are crustaceans. They're actually really closely related to crabs and lobsters and things like that, but they live on land and they eat dead plant material. They are detritivores, and what they will do is they will eat up this plant material and they will poop out good soil just like all the other ones. But these guys, the worms can take care of really big stuff like the peels and stuff that I showed you here, but these guys will generally eat leaves and dead leaf material, and they will even sometimes eat dead plants. And so you might find them hanging out underneath rocks. That's because what they're doing is they're actually eating old roots underneath the rocks. And what they'll do is if they feel really threatened, they will curl up into a ball. This guy does not feel threatened, apparently, but they'll curl up into the ball and into a ball and act like a big old shield of armor. And it'll be hard. It'll be really hard for anybody to sort of crack that pill bug out of its shell if it's feeling threatened. And these guys fill a very similar role to things like millipedes. I know some people get scared of millipedes because they have all those legs, but millipedes are detritivores. They actually they can't hurt you even if they wanted to, and they don't really want to because they're just busy eating dead leaves and things like that, and turning it into good usable soil. And that good usable soil in turn gets used by plants who grow and then die and deposit all of those plants onto the ground. They fall and collapse onto the ground, and these guys get more food. So really, they're kind of like farmers, if you really think about it. So these guys, this guy's right now is looking around for good plants to eat. These guys, millipedes are actually not millipedes, roly-polies, these little pill bugs are actually not native to the United States, believe it or not, but they're not considered an invasive. And the reason why is because to be an invasive species, you need to be non-native and harmful. But these guys are actually pretty good for our soil. There's a ton of different kinds of pill bugs, actually. There are dozens and dozens, probably, if you own a garden, there are probably dozens and dozens of different species of pill bug in your garden right now. And they all come from places like Europe or Africa or Asia, but there are no pill bugs native to the United States. They all come from other places. So I mentioned before that it isn't just bugs and it isn't just animals that are detritivores. There are actually a lot of different kinds of detritivores. And a lot of them I can't really show you because they are too small. So things like bacteria tend to be detritivores. They grow in places where creatures have died. Actually, that's what that gross smell is. Whenever, say, like a dead animal's on the side of the road, that gross smell doesn't come from the animal. It actually comes from all of the things eating the animal. The hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of little bugs, little bacteria, and single-celled organisms that are eating it and producing ammonia, which is why those same guys are doing the exact same process in my compost bin, but since I have air moving through it, it's harder to tell. And so what they'll do is whenever they're eating a dead plant or a dead animal, they will give off heat and ammonia. And that heat and ammonia will build and build and build. And actually, it's really dangerous. There was a video a while back that was floating around the internet of a whale that was washed up and died. It had died and was washed up on a beach. And after a little while, it started to bloat and bloat and bloat, and then it just exploded. And that's actually from all of the ammonia and heat that these little microscopic organisms that are eating away at this guy produced. I know it's kind of gross, but that's what happens. All of that ammonia and the bloating of the bodies for a little while after they died is all of these detritivores just eating it away. But I mentioned that other things can be detritivores too. One example, and I pulled this guy off of a tree here, is a fungus. Fungus tend to be detritivores. So what they will do is they will latch onto dead things a lot of the time, or they will have a big old root system in the ground, and they will eat all of the dead plant and animal material that's around. So if you've ever seen mold growing on like a sandwich, or in dairy, sometimes it gets all curdled and gross. That's mold. That's fungus just doing its job. They can attach themselves to trees like this one did. And they're not necessarily harmful, actually. What they'll do is they'll eat nutrients. They'll take nutrients from the tree, but they'll actually give back nutrients because they do what's known as nitrogen fixation. So they will take nitrogen that the tree can't use, and they will convert it into a way that the tree can use it. And now the tree gets all of its vitamins and minerals, and the fungus gets its food. So fungus are kind of an interesting bunch because you can have huge fungus. Like there's a fungus in Washington that covers several miles. Just wild. It's a huge fungus, but you'll never see it because it's under the ground. And the entire forest that this fungus lives underneath is controlled by the fungus. The fungus will decide how many nutrients go to this tree, or if this tree becomes sick, the fungus might just cut it off. So that tree will just die, but it won't infect anybody else. Its roots won't interconnect with other trees and reach them. It'll just die, and the disease won't go any further because this fungus regulated it. So these detritivores actually can serve a very, very important function in keeping our plants healthy and happy. You shouldn't pull pieces of fungus off of trees or the ground or anything. I pulled a very small one, and we're going to be using it for teaching purposes here. And there was plenty more fungus on the thing. I didn't just remove the only piece of fungus that it had. So aside from fungus, there are also other things that help detritivores, that are detritivores. So if we look at this stick here, you might think, oh, there's all this moss on the stick. Well, guess what? This isn't moss. This stick, I'm really liking this stick because it's got lichen on it. This stuff is what's known as lichen. Lichen is spelled L-I-C-H-E-N. So it's not like L-I-K-I-N. It's not like I'm liking it. It's lichen, L-I-C-H-E-N. And there's actually so many different kinds of lichen that it's nearly impossible to tell how many there actually are. In fact, I looked on here, and I'm not an expert on lichen or anything, but I looked on here a little bit ahead of time, and I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different kinds of lichen. Not even just different individual pieces of lichen, but 11 distinctly different kinds of lichen on this tiny little stick alone. So lichen is actually not one organism, but many organisms. It's several. It can be 2 organisms, it could be 3 organisms. Sometimes it's even 4 or 5 organisms. And what it is it's a combination of fungus and bacteria, usually algae. And sometimes it can actually also be combined with plant material. But think of lichen like a fungus sandwich. There's fungus that holds on to the tree or branch or rock even. There's algae in the middle that converts energy, converts sunlight into energy, takes nutrients and produces it. Excuse me. And there's also fungus on top that sort of holds it all together and moves things around. So this guy right here is what's known as old man's beard. And actually, what's kind of interesting about old man's beard and other kinds of lichen is these guys are helping us to eradicate disease. So these detritivores, they'll grow. Lichen is a detritivore. It will grow virtually everywhere. And some different kinds of lichen have different kinds of fungus on them. And actually, penicillium, which is used to make penicillin, was a type of lichen. It was a fungus that grew in lichen, penicillium. And so it was entirely by accident. Fleming, whenever he discovered penicillin could do stuff, he did it by accident. He was kind of a sloppy eater, and he ate inside of his lab, which is a big no-no, but it ended up working out for him. He discovered that the cultures that he made of bacteria didn't grow after he had his lunch, and he realized that he was spreading his old moldy lunch to the little cultures of bacteria that he was trying to grow. And that was how we realized that these pieces of lichen, the fungus that grows in lichen like this, could prevent disease and the spread of disease in bacteria. And so we actually have detritivores to thank for modern medicine, and we have detritivores to thank for modern vaccines, because we would still have problems like polio right here in the United States and smallpox and things like that if it wasn't for detritivores like this lichen here. So old man's beard, I can only identify a few kinds of these lichen. There's too many for me to be able to identify them all. But old man's beard actually has antibacterial properties. You can actually take old man's beard and crush it up and use it as a sort of salve to keep infection out of your wounds. Ruffle lichen, which is this stuff right here that looks all ruffly, ruffle lichen can do a very similar thing. It is actually used, we use the fungus in ruffle lichen to create vaccines. So these guys live on branches and rocks, lichen does, and it fixes nutrients that they get from plants and dead materials and turns it into stuff that we can use. And we actually also can use these fungus and lichen and things like that to eradicate disease, which is incredible. So I think one thing that we should perhaps talk about to close here is that detritivores have virtually always existed on this planet. Algae has existed since pretty much day one, that things that like animals existed. And these guys, whenever an animal dies, they'll just eat the old animal. It's a great strategy because it means you don't have to go hunting. You just kind of roam around, and whatever dead things you come across, you eat. So detritivores tend to live at the bottom of forests and things like that. And actually, I have an example of a very ancient detritivore. This is a trilobite. Trilobites were at one point the most abundant creature on the planet. They made up something like a quarter of all creatures on this planet. This trilobite is from about 350 million years ago. It's from Morocco, this one. And these guys, kind of like roly-polies, used to skitter around on the ocean floor and pick up dead plants and things that made their way down and eat them. A lot of fish tend to be detritivores. And they would eat all of these dead materials just skittering around on the ocean floor. And that was how they became so abundant, is because there was just so much room for growth. So many creatures are detritivores. And what they'll do is they will eat these dead plants and things. But it's kind of funny. I also have this. And if you don't know what this is a piece of petrified wood. So petrified wood is what happens whenever wood gets to a place, it dies, the tree falls or something like that happens, and it can't decompose. So why can't a tree decompose? Well, there are a couple reasons why trees don't decompose. Is they get trapped in mud or something, and there's no bacteria, there's no air. So these detritivores can't do their work because they need air to be able to decompose things. And this specific piece, which is from about 275 million years ago, is because the tree itself never had the opportunity to decompose because there was nothing that was decomposing trees. So this tree was fairly new 275 million years ago. This was a very basic tree, very, very basic tree. It didn't look like the trees we have nowadays. It was essentially just a big shoot and some palm fronds. And whenever it fell and it collapsed, there was a brief period of time where no detritivores knew what to do with wood. They had no idea how to eat trees. Now, it didn't take long for them to figure it out, but before they did, this tree ended up getting deposited under the ground, and it never had the chance to decompose. So now I've just got a piece of tree that has been replaced by rock. That's why it's so sturdy. But I have this piece of tree from 250 million years ago that no detritivore ate. Now, I want you to imagine what would happen if no detritivores ate any trees. Maybe in 50 years, our forests would be absolutely littered with trees just dead, lying on the ground, nothing eating them away. We'd have to be climbing over tree trunk after tree trunk after tree trunk as we went through the forest. Now, I know there are tree trunks in the forest now, but there would be so many. Now, think 100 years from now. The entire forest will have probably collapsed and been regrown at this point. There'd be so many tree trunks. 200 years from now. Now think 1,000 years from now. How many tree trunks would we have? It'd be incredible. There'd be so much lumber all over the place. And it wouldn't just be lumber. What if the detritivores didn't eat any plants either? Now you've just suddenly got these piles and piles and piles and piles of plants just everywhere. And nothing's eating them away. So detritivores serve a very important function so that we don't just get pieces of petrified wood all over the place and other things like that. So, in conclusion, detritivores are animals, plants, fungus, just about anything that eats dead plant material and converts it into usable new soil. Because otherwise, if these guys didn't exist, we would use up all of our resources super quickly. These guys are the reason why plants and dirt and things like that are considered renewable. If it weren't for detritivores, we would not have a functional planet. All right, well, that's all I have to talk about today. So I thank you for coming, and I will see you next time. Bye.